Um, Hello. It's been a little bit, but I'm back. I'm ready to power through. Now that I'm in the 700s, it feels like truly the home stretch. So, okay, yes. Where was I? Don't remember. It's been 8 days. Okay. So it looks like Moses is about to tear up some homes, which doesn't really tell us anything about what's happening because that's always what's happening. Okay, the two aides found out. So something about local people in the St. Lawrence that Moses was going to tear out their homes, First Parkways. They had to be protected. Harriman's talking. Um, okay, well, there were cottages lining the shore near Messina. True says, and then that's Truex. Nice looking cottages too. Not luxurious, but nice. Cottages into which you could tell loving care had gone. Moses was just obliterating them. But about 10 minutes after we got back to Albany, there was a letter from Moses to Harriman. These people, us, had been up in his territory, and we had been talking to people we shouldn't have been talking to, etc. And that was the last time we heard of the little people. It was never brought up again. The governor had backed down. Okay, I'm so sorry to pause so early, but let me just look up who is Harriman. When was Harriman the governor? Okay, W. Averell Harriman was the governor from um 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 um, um, um from 1955 to 1958. And then, oh, okay, this is exciting. He was succeeded by Nelson Rockefeller. That's a name you've heard before. And W. Averell Harriman, he went on to have an illustrious career, and he was the Secretary of State under JFK and Lyndon B. Johnson. Wow. Okay, great. Awesome. Okay. The governor backed down. Shortly thereafter, he suggested that the huge centerpiece of the St. Lawrence project be named the Robert Moses Power Dam. Soon after, he was being afforded star billing at ribbon cuttings, next to Moses's, of course. Okay, so the governor is getting star billings. True's tardiness in perceiving the change in the Moses-Harriman relationship cost him a humiliating tongue lashing. For a Brooklyn Queens Expressway ribbon cutting in 1958, at which Harriman was to be the main speaker, quote, I had written a speech kidding Moses, unquote. True recalls. We were in the car going toward the ceremony, and the governor looked at the speech and blew up and accused me of seeking to undermine his relationship with Robert Moses. True started to argue that you can score points by attacking Moses, but Harriman flew into a rage, violently upbraided his aide, and told him, I want you to know Robert Moses is coming out for me in the campaign. It was a small consolation for True that Moses's keen eye for political realities saw early on the popularity of Harriman's opponent, Nelson A. Rockefeller, and that the hoped-for endorsement never occurred. All right. And as we just learned, it looks like Rockefeller became the governor after Harriman. As important as Moses's relationship with the state's governor was his relationship with its administrative machinery. It was, of course, largely his machinery, the governmental apparatus his State Reconstruction Commission had designed in 1919, back when he was a young boy. He, more than any other individual, knew which of the tens of thousands of administrative positions in that government were crucial to his purposes, and after a quarter of a century of power in the state, he had Moses men in most of those posts. He had taken measures to minimize the threat to his purposes posed by key officials who were not Moses men. Some of these officials would have been astonished to learn, most of them never did, that their secretaries were on Moses's payroll as well as the state's, and that in transcribing confidential memoranda and minutes of secret meetings devoted to blocking a Moses project or to curbing Moses's power, these secretaries made an extra carbon, which was delivered nightly to Moses's representatives in Albany. He's always watching. More than 20 years before, while Bill O'Dwyer was still a cop pounding the beat, Robert Moses had laid the ground. Who is Bill O'Dwyer? I'm just going to quick refresh. See, this is why I should read more often. I just can't remember all these characters. Bill O'Dwyer is an Irish-American politician who is the 100th mayor of New York City. When was he the mayor? 1946 to 1950? Oh, okay. I see. So it was LaGuardia. He was the mayor for like forever. And then there was O'Dwyer for a minute. And then the next guy was, we haven't really talked about the next guy yet, but it's going to be Vincent Impellitteri. So that's a little something to look forward to, I guess. Um, yeah, he's definitely on the list of, I don't know if he's on the list of interesting deaths, but he's on the list of deaths during consensual sex, which my friend started. But it wasn't confirmed. It was just the New York Magazine article. And New York Mag says a lot of stuff. I was recently, about an hour ago, I was on the train. I have this like very stupid infection, but I think it's because my mom works in healthcare. Whenever I mention infections to her, she gets very like, well, you should take meds, like you should take antibiotics or whatever. And so anyway, I had to take the train to the pharmacy and I read New York Magazine the whole time and it was pretty fun. Anyway, let's get back to 1958. Okay, so there's ribbon cutting, blah blah blah. More than 20 years before, while Bill O'Dwyer was still a cop pounding the beat, Robert Moses had laid the groundwork for control of the state machinery that would directly affect his road building, dividing the state Department of Public Works into 10 geographical districts, placing the entire New York City Long Island area, in which most of his road building was concentrated, in a single and hence easily controllable district, District 10. And writing into state law a unique provision that gave his Long Island State Park Commission a unique veto power over all parkway plans. Moses cemented his control of District 10's engineers, already firm through identity of interest and philosophy, with stronger mortars. His favor was, for many engineers, the only road out of the tedious progression of the life of a civil service engineer, a life that offered little in the way of either money or power. Cultivate his favor, and you could go on luxurious jaunts and be well paid for the privilege. As District 10 Chief Engineer, J.J. Darcy was in being awarded lucrative consultantships in Moses' highway studies of other cities. Cultivate that favor, and you could be placed in command of great enterprises, as Arthur B. Williams was when Moses plucked him out of routine middle echelon engineering civil service job and handed him authority over 100 middle echelon civil service engineers by appointing him general manager of the Niagara State Park Commission. Cultivate that favor, and when you had enough civil service, you might receive a partnership in the consulting engineer firms that received Moses' immensely lucrative contracts. Darcy's successor, Darcy, who's J.J. Darcy, the chief District 10 civil engineer. There's so many engineers whose names we need to know. Okay, Darcy's successor, Milton E. Gould, became Milton E. Gould of Buckley, Shumavan and Gould. Buckley, Shumavan, and Gould. Maybe that's a famous thing that I should know. Buckley, Shumavan, and no, it's definitely not a famous thing that I should know. It like popped up one time on Wikipedia in an article that my friend wrote. If you know, there's a guy named Epic Genius, that's his Wikipedia name, which he created when he was like a tween, but his real name is Ryan, and he writes, if you read a really in-depth, well-written article about a building or a train station in New York City, you can bet your bottom dollar it was written by Ryan. Anyway, that's the only mention of this random engineering firm. And it's on the article about Lions Pool Recreation Center. Anyway, okay, so we have an engineer. Okay. Lose that favor, and you would find yourself mired for decades in the same job or transferred to some other district, as a recalcitrant patrolman is transferred from the Broadway beat to Staten Island. And you would wait out the long years to your retirement sitting in a drab office in Hornell, supervising the grading of graveled farm roads in Chemung County. Even during the few months when Johnson was heading DPW, he and the other Harriman appointees, teetering precariously atop the huge Department of Public Works bureaucracy, proved unable to deflect it even momentarily from the course on which it had been gathering momentum for long decades. The Department of Public Works is on a tremendous hierarchy, True would say years later. When we got there, it was his hierarchy. When we left, it was still all basically his. Under Tallamy, who's Tallamy? I'm almost certainly not trying to find the entomologist. New York City Tallamy. I don't know. It's not coming up. History. Okay, I don't know who Tallamy is. Under Ptolemy, Department of Public Works had given Moses a veto power over all highway projects in the New York metropolitan area. Except for a few months, he retained that veto during Johnson's superintendency, too. The returns electing Rockefeller governor had hardly landed on Rockefeller's desk in November 1958 when a hand-delivered letter from Moses arrived there recommending the appointment to the Department of Public Works superintendency of J. Burke McMorran, chief engineer of Moses' State Power Authority. A prototype second-generation Moses man, McMorran was not as brilliant an engineer as originals like Art Howland or Earl Andrews, but he was competent in his profession and possessed the qualities that Moses now considered more important than brilliance. The qualities Moses mentions first in his evaluation of McMorran reveal what he was looking for. McMorran was not an innovator. He was a good soldier, always loyal. Rockefeller accepted the recommendation, and for at least the first term of Rockefeller's governorship, Moses still had his veto power. In an arrangement at least tacitly approved by 3 governors, an arrangement lasting for at least 17 years after the war, Moses had all the say, McMorran says, over who got contracts on all New York City area jobs. And not just on contracts. Moses had the say, absolute authority, to decide not only who should design and build all highways in the metropolitan area, but which highways should be built, when they would be built, and where they would be built. The state had, in effect, turned over to him, intact and complete, all its authority over the construction of arterial highways in and around New York City. This authority was extensive. The interstate highway system was described by its creators as a partnership between the state highway departments and the federal government, and that description was accurate. No city was a partner. Federal funds for an arterial highway within a city were handed not to the city, but to the state in which it was located. The state, not the city, had the power to spend those funds. The state had the final say on every detail of the plan and the specifications, down to the selection of the specific city streets and lots along which the roads would run. They supervised every detail of the actual construction. And since New York State had turned that power over to Robert Moses, that power was vested in him. His possession of it therefore strengthened the control he had already possessed over highways by virtue of his influence with the federal government. Strong already, his power was now stronger still. Over the planning and building of arterial highways in and around the city of New York, arterial highways, which would do so much to shape the future of the city, the federal and state governments had a stranglehold. The hands that implemented that stranglehold were the hands of Robert Moses. It was not only forces outside the city's government that Robert Moses used in bending the city to his will. He used forces inside that government as well. He used, for example, the force of greed. Greed had always been the force that drove the city's 5-year democratic political machine. But Moses' 12 precious years in office in the city had been LaGuardia's 12 years too. And during those years, the machine's influence in the city's government had been all but eliminated. Moses, in getting things done, had been able to deal almost entirely with the little flower, and only occasionally with the spiritual descendants of Red Mike Hylan. I love that I know the personalities of these old governors. Anyway, Red Mike Hylan, yeah, he's a loser. He's he was the Tammany guy, I think, right? And LaGuardia was a Republican and less corrupt. Now, however, the machine was back in power. It was not at first dominated, as it had been before LaGuardia, by the Manhattan Democratic Organization housed in Tammany Hall. The Great Wigwam at Union Square. What? So I guess the Great Wigwam in Union Square is like the Tammany organization. Weakened in relation to its allies by the population exodus from Manhattan, the Manhattan Organization had been cut off from patronage and contracts at City Hall by LaGuardia, from the State House by Lehman, and from the White House by Roosevelt, who, taking revenge for his defiant support of Alfred E. Smith at the 1932 presidential convention, had funneled federal largesse instead through the boss of the Bronx, Edward J. Flynn. I'm so curious about this boss of the Bronx. With enough going to Brooklyn to make its democratic organization as well as Flynn's stronger than Manhattan's. Okay, wow. So FDR is really just into the boss of the Bronx now. Edward J. Flynn. I'm just going to Google his name and see if he ever went anywhere, because with a name like boss of the Bronx, this guy just sounds like the sort of guy that would be famous. Wow, not that famous. yeah, his Wikipedia just says that he's known for mid-20th century control of the Bronx Democratic Party organization. Something I've been interested in lately is when Wikipedia capitalizes the word the, because it really depends on what the thing is. And so like the Beatles, like whether to capitalize the in the Beatles was a really famous big argument that was printed in the Wall Street Journal because of how much of a thing it was. Let's see. It looks like the Bronx has a lowercase the. Interesting. Anyway, apparently, oh, this is actually kind of interesting. Have you ever heard the phrase "in like Flynn"? I feel like I've heard that before, not frequently, not from people I'm close friends with, but I've definitely heard it before. I don't know if it's on TV or what, but yeah, I'm in like Flynn. Apparently, some people think that came from Edward J. Flynn, the boss of the Bronx. But other people say it's from Errol Flynn, the actor, which I don't know. He seems pretty famous. So who knows? Okay, cool. It's so interesting to read about these old. I think that I don't know what's inspiring this, but lately I have totally been on this kick where I just like I haven't been reading a lot of news that's current, but I've been super into reading stuff from the 20th century. And I wonder if what it is that I just get kind of bummed out about most of the news. Like I don't know. I can only read so much about the election until I just like it's just not it doesn't always spark joy. But it's really fun to read about old stuff. Or one of my favorite hobbies lately has been searching celebrity names on newspapers.com and then trying to find their earliest appearance. And so, yeah, yesterday I was like so curious about Melania. As I have been many times, she's kind of a mysterious lady. And so I searched Melania Naus, her maiden name, and her first press mentions were as the girlfriend of Donald Trump in like 1999-ish. So I don't know. But that's just from the press that's on newspapers.com, which is not all of it. But that was interesting. And it was interesting reading about like the first mentions of all the Kardashians. Like I think I'm a moderate Kardashian fan. Like I don't think I stand by very many of their decisions, but they're just interesting. And I always forget that like Kim Kardashian's the most famous one now, but it used to be Kourtney that was the most famous. And so the early press is all about Kourtney. And it's always like, daughter of OJ trial lawyer, Robert Kardashian, is on a TV show. Can you believe it? What else? Who else did I search that was interesting? A bunch of people had names that were too generic to search. So it was hard. But anyway. Yeah, I do. I love hearing about the news from a long time ago. It's really amazing to look at the front page of like national newspapers from like I don't know, not that long ago, like 40 years ago, and only be able to understand like only a few of the headlines. Like there's just so much international stuff that has changed that I just no longer understand. So I should probably learn more, but it's fun. I also, there's a special spot in my heart for like the old school women's sections because some of them are so interesting. I don't know what it is about them. I think that you can just like, it's just really interesting to see how people talk to each other. The housewife section of the newspaper is just like so quaint and like bizarre, I guess, from today's perspective. Old country names, me too. I like that XKCD. I don't know if I would be able to find it quickly, but there's this one XKCD that's like it has a flow chart, and so it's like if you have a map, you can use this flow chart to like figure out what year the map is from based on the names of the different countries and cities and stuff. It's kind of fun. I haven't actually tested it, but maybe someday I will. Okay, anyway, back to back to business. So I really got hung up on the boss of the Bronx, Edward J. Flynn. But yeah, so he has a bunch of the money because people are skeptical of the whole Tammany situation, because I guess FDR doesn't like Tammany because Tammany backed Al Smith in the 1932 presidential convention. Interesting. By 1945, the Great Wigwam, which is Tammany, itself no longer belonged to the Manhattan Organization, which, unable to meet the mortgage payments, had the building sold out from under it. Asterisk. I never thought I'd live to see the tiger get skinned, Jimmy Walker remarked. The sale was symbolic not only of the loss of power by Tammany, but of the rise in power of the city's labor unions. The purchaser was the children's dress unit of the ILGWU. How are we supposed to know what the ILGWU? How was I supposed to know that stood for International Ladies Garment Workers Union? This book was so written in the 70s because I would have no idea. Journalists, rhetorical traditionalists were still referring to that democracy as a whole as Tammany Hall. And if that catchphrase was misleading in political terms, it was accurate in moral ones. For the controlling structure of the post-war democratic machine was different from the pre-LaGuardia model. The ethics of the machine were not. As the Herald Tribune editorialized in 1945, a vast corrupt organization, starved through 12 long years, is panting for its revenge. To the men of the machine, the end of the LaGuardia administration, cleanest in the city's history, meant only one thing. The 12 lean years were over. Now was the time for the fat. E finita la cucagna. I don't know what that means, but it's probably Latin, or maybe not. The little flower had promised, and he had kept his promise. But now he was gone. The party was on again. New York was again a city in which, all caps, scandal and graft and fraud glared bold and black out of the headlines stacked on newsstands, in which the newspapers were filled with reports of petty peculation, and in which the reports, no matter how lurid, were no more than a hint of the extent to which the city was again a place in which the badges of governmental authority, the badges of fire inspectors and health inspectors and plumbing inspectors and building inspectors, had become again silver and gold-plated licenses to extort money from the city's citizens. New York was a city in which the police, every day, sold the law in the streets. Sometimes it almost seemed as if being on the force was synonymous with being on the take, and in which sacred justice was sold in the very temples of justice, which was not too surprising, of course, since many of Justice's black-robed priests who presided in those temples had purchased the right to do so, in which the only law that really counted was the law of the jungle. New York City was a city in which public office was, increasingly, a means to private profit. New York was a city in which it sometimes seemed as if there was scarcely an office holder who didn't demand a slice of the pie, and in which the pie was big enough so that it sometimes seemed as if a slice was available for every office holder, no matter what his party. The Democrats shrewdly making enough key Republicans a part of the arrangements by which the city was governed, putting them on the public payroll, giving them a share of judgeships and a cut of lucrative city contracts, taking them in as business partners so that the GOP wouldn't try too hard to disrupt those arrangements, and so that when a private citizen or the citizens' union or a newspaper demanded an investigation of official corruption, no one with the power to conduct a real one was interested in doing so. New York was the city of the fix, of protection, of the shakedown. The 12 years of LaGuardia had been only an interlude. New York was again what it had been before the Little Flower bounced into City Hall, a city in which everything had its price. The price was highest in Moses's Fields. Ever since the post-Civil War years in which the Tweed Ring and authorizing municipal building on a scale that gave New York its own Reconstruction era took fixed percentages, 5% for the mayor, 20% for the comptroller, 25% for William Marcy Tweed, who, with his choice of any post, chose the Public Works Commissionership. Of the padding in contractors' padded bills, Public Works had been the main ingredient in the rich swill of graft on which Tammany battened. Now the techniques were different, subtler, smoother. Charlie Murphy had taught his Sakums that it was stupid to take cash, too easy for some prying reporter or rebel district attorney to trace it, too easy to prove that it had been taken in exchange for a favor, too easy to subpoena a contractor's books and haul the contractor's timid little bookkeeper before a grand jury and frighten him into telling what the items listed as cash disbursements really represented. By precept, it was not by preachment. By precept, if not by preachment. For Silent Charlie had not received his nickname for nothing. Who's Charlie Murphy? I don't. We're supposed to know Silent Charlie Murphy? No, Charlie Murphy, NYC history. I don't need the comedian and actor. Okay, Charlie Murphy was the boss of Tammany Hall from 1902 to 1924. Okay, Silent Charlie had not received his nickname for nothing. For example, by having his board of aldermen hold up street closing permits for the construction of Pennsylvania Station until the railroad awarded the excavation contract to a firm in which he had a hidden financial interest, he showed Tammany that there were safer ways of making money from public works. By 1905, Sachem George Washington Plunkett, who as state senator had ridden at the head of the Black Horse Cavalry, was sitting resplendent in handlebar mustache and gleaming stovepipe hat on Graziano's boot-black stand in the old courthouse off Foley Square at noon hours, expansively explaining how cavalry were obsolete and how he was coining millions out of the coincidences surrounding big improvements. Coincidences which he called, in a phrase he may have coined, honest graft. Silent Charlie, who, if he didn't invent honest graft, refined it to meet the needs of a modern political organization, coined no phrases. He had not received his nickname for nothing. Okay, that was funny. That was really funny. I'm like writing a book right now, and it's definitely not as detailed as this, but I need to like use that sort of joke. Like repeating something is so funny. I'm really having like extremely basic realizations like, have you ever heard repetition can sometimes make things funny, but just let me have them. And I'm just going to write a note to myself that this Charlie guy is the Tammany boss, 1902 to 1924. Murphy and Plunkett were uneducated men. They had never been to law school. If they had, they would have found the making of honest graft safer and easier still. Al Smith, as always, phrased it best. Strolling through a law school library one day, the governor noticed a student poring intently over his books. There, he said with a smile, is a young man studying how to take a bribe and call it a fee. By the 20s, most honest graft was being worked through fees, mostly through legal fees. More politicians belong to the legal than any other profession. But also through the real estate brokers' fees called commissions, the insurance brokers' fees called premiums, and the public relations fees called retainers. Jimmy Walker's crew, overconfident and careless, forgot Murphy's precepts, but Samuel Seabury, finding the cash in their tin boxes, drummed the teachings of the master into Tammany again strongly enough so that the braves would never forget them again. In the post-LaGuardia era, there was no more tin box brigade. It was the retainer regiment now. Corrupt public officials who were lawyers would support or oppose a bill according to the wishes of a business firm, and later the firm would retain the official in his private capacity as an attorney, paying him a fee for services, legal services, of course, rendered. Corrupt public officials who were insurance brokers would be allowed to write a firm's policies and thereby to obtain the premiums attached. In the interaction of politics and public works, cash was now the medium of exchange only for the lowest levels. Now, if some investigator found that a contractor's books included a $10,000 payment to a city councilman, next to the payment would be the notation legal fee. And who could prove that the services the councilman had rendered to earn the fee were anything other than legal? That the councilman's vote in favor of a bill the firm also happened to favor was anything but a coincidence. The presence of a councilman's name in a contractor's book would, moreover, be unusual, an indication that either the contractor or the councilman was still ignorant of the higher refinements of honest graft, one of which was to have the contractor pay the fee not to the councilman but to another law firm, which would then, taking out a small handling charge for itself, pass it along. The profit in public works in New York had long been huge. With the post-war building boom, it reached new dimensions. It's a king's ransom in a city this size, Reuben Lazarus said. And if there was subtlety now in the making of this profit, the making was still for the machine the motive. The greed was only refined, not eliminated. The tiger, starved for so long, was more voracious than ever. Every large-scale public work, it sometimes seemed, had to have its arrangements, its payoffs, its deals, its coincidences. Until the coincidences were arranged, there would be no public work. If the Board of Estimate or City Council approval was required, that approval would not be forthcoming. If implementation of announced policy by a city agency was necessary, that implementation would be endlessly delayed. The great mayor was dying, almost penniless, in a little house in Riverdale. In the city hall he left behind, everything had a price. And to get things done in the city, one had to pay it. Once Robert Moses would have scorned to pay it. Once he had sworn to pay it, refusing for 4 bitter years to make even the minor compromise over patronage that might have made possible passage of at least some of his proposed civil service reform measures. Later, while attempting to realize his Long Island Park plan, refusing for more bitter years, refusing even though he saw the possibility that his refusal would doom his great dream forever, to make deals with the Nassau County Republican machine that alone could give him the right to create Jones Beach. But that Robert Moses no longer existed. The Robert Moses who had taken his place paid the price, and he paid it in full. He had the money to pay it. He had the money partly because his control of the city housing authority gave him control over close to $1.25 billion in federal and state funds dispensed through that agency. Partly because his control of the State Department of Public Works gave him control over another $1.25 billion in federal and state funds dispensed through that agency. And partly because his control of the mayor's slum clearance committee gave him a control of $1 billion more dispensed through that agency. A total, during the first 15 years after World War II, of close to $3.5 billion, which he dispensed in the city on behalf of the federal and state agencies, largely beyond the control of the city's government. But mainly, he had the money to pay it because of his control of an agency that was largely beyond the control of any government, federal, state, or city, the Triborough Bridge and Tunnel Authority. With the war and gasoline and tire rationing ended and automobiles pouring off the assembly lines again, the volume of automobile traffic in New York soared. I need a sip of water. In 1941, the Triborough Bridge carried 11 million vehicles. In 1946, 13 million. In 47, 16 million. 48, 19 million. And then there's more numbers. And then by 1960, 15 years after the war ended, it was carrying 46 million vehicles per year compared to 11 in 1941. And that was just one bridge. Traffic on all Triborough Authority toll facilities had been 43 million in 1941. It was 112 million in 1951 and 154 in 1960. The authority's annual income had been 8 million in 1941. And in 1951, with the Brooklyn Battery Tunnel's 35-cent per car charge swelling the toll receipts, the authority's annual income was 26 million, and then 37 million, and then 43 million in 1962. And then with the Verrazano Narrows Bridge opening in 1967, it was 75 million, almost 10 times higher than it had been before the war. These receipts were, of course, capitalized through the issuance of revenue bonds. The income he received from bond sales, combined with other authority income, meant that Robert Moses had available to spend on public works within New York City during the first 15 years after World War II, more than $750 million additional. Part of the significance of that figure emerges when it is combined with the federal and state money Robert Moses spent on public works within the city during those 15 years. And the total is then compared with what the financially strapped city itself spent. During that period, agencies controlled by Moses and largely independent of any supervision by the city's government spent on public works within the city close to $4.5 billion. The city government, mayor, board of estimate, city council, was able during that period to spend through all its separate departments a total of less than $3.75 billion. Robert Moses spent on public works within the city of New York more, far more, than the city spent. But a greater part of the significance of Triborough Bridge and Tunnel Authority revenue, vast in itself, was the secrecy in which its spending could be cloaked. Federal and state expenditures were public records, subject to public disclosure. But because Triborough was a public authority, unlike the City Housing Authority, a genuine public authority, its expenditures were not. I think I'm going to stop there. Ooh, in a couple pages, there's a really long footnote, and I'm excited about that because I'm just kind of used to footnotes usually just being like mid, like the same goodness as the rest of the book. But in this book, the footnotes are always fun. So that's something good. See you later. I hope you have a good afternoon, evening, whatever. Bye.